Sometimes we take the right to vote for granted. We tend to forget how difficult it was for groups to obtain this fundamental right in a democracy. The large push for women's suffrage began in the 1840s with Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, and others organizing the Seneca Falls Convention. Stanton addressed 300 people in the convention discussing women's rights and women's right to vote. Stanton later met up with Susan B. Anthony, and they worked together to push for women's suffrage in the 1800s. Both women were once ardent abolitionists, and Stanton had a solid friendship with the famous abolitionist leader Frederick Douglass. However, no figure in history is perfect. Stanton and Anthony showed resentment against African American men when the proposed 15th Amendment didn't include women's right to vote. In 1870, the 15th Amendment gave African American men the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton are still the most famous women's suffrage activists. For decades, these women pushed for women's suffrage. They held rallies, conventions, and pushed social issues that galvanized women to join their cause. Despite their push, there was significant resistance. Anthony and Stanton died before the 19th Amendment was passed. Nevertheless, Alice Paul, Ida B. Wells, Mary Church Terrell, and even Jane Addams, the founder of Hull House, were ardent activists for suffrage. Alice Paul learned many protest methods in England and brought those tactics to the United States: picketing, protests, parades, and when she was arrested, she and other prisoners held a hunger strike. When the prison threatened to force feed her, the public grew sympathetic to Alice Paul and her cause. More and more states began to show support for women's suffrage. President Wilson also showed support for women's suffrage. The 19th Amendment was passed by Congress in 1919, but it took until 1920 to get enough states to ratify the amendment. The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on any account of sex. Although this was a monumental victory for women, many African American women and other minority groups were still denied voting rights decades after this law passed.